Hello, and welcome to the hashtag Here to Hear Keeping It 100 podcast. My name is Damon Naylor, and I'll be serving as your host. I am the Membership Enhancement Facilitator for NAFCM, and I'm joined by my co-host, DG Mon, the president of NAFCM. Hello, DG. What's going on, man?
Good morning, Damon. Just sitting here sipping my coffee and can't wait to get started. I hear you got a great guest this morning.
Yes. We have somebody in the waiting room waiting on us, and that special guest is Julie Rouge out of Arlington, Virginia. Julie is the Associate Dean and Associate Professor at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. So we're just excited, DG, to have her. And at this time, we're going to go ahead and bring her in.
Ah, there she is. Thought she wasn't in the house.
I know, right?
I know.
Disappeared on
us. Did Dr. Rouge leave us? Did we scare her away? What's going on? Come on, we'll be nice. Oh, there she is. All right.
I would ask I guess it's a hypothetical question.
Sure.
Can all sides win in this situation? Because what one side may find honorable, the other side will find dishonorable. You know, with something that is just highly esteemed, it's something that's just lifted up on one side. On the other side is humiliating. It's not something that the others want to esteem. So my question is, can we actually win? Can all sides win? How do we have those conversations that can transform the community and help us to get through the situation where we can all try to win?
Yeah, I think so. I try not to view the world in a zero-sum, some have to win, some have to lose framework. But I actually think your point is really important. And I think the short answer is no. All sides can't win in the sense of what their original position was coming in, right? We're not gonna, change is probably gonna be made, and there's people who are not gonna want that change. And that being said, though, that we're a democracy, and that's how this works, right? Is that we're supposed to think on tough issues, deliberate on them, have difficult conversations, and come to a decision for the moment about how we want to handle something. And that decision may get revisited in 5 years or 10 years. None of these are forever decisions, but the decision should reflect kind of the consensus of the community as it exists in the moment. And as it's constituted in the moment, and with the changing, and potentially those decisions change as that community changes and it grows. So I think to the extent of winning in terms of your initial position, no, I don't think we have solutions in which everyone walks away feeling like what they came into the conversation with is what they've ended up with. What I do think, though, is that we can have people who feel like there was a decision made following a process in which their concerns were really heard, and that what their goals and intentions were really heard, and where they can really hear other people's and really, begin to understand why someone may not share their perspective, or someone might feel something isn't harmful, or someone might feel it's deeply harmful and is impacting them. And so that they can come away from it feeling like they know where decisions came from, they understand the basis for them, and they feel like they were heard in the process. And I think that walking away when maybe the decision didn't go your way, but you feel deeply heard is still a win. It's not a win on your original position, but it's still a win. And I think it's integrated in the community where, it is healthy for us to not all agree with each other. And it's healthy for us to have different positions. And it's healthy for us to have spaces where we can talk to each other about them and build community in that way. So yeah, I don't think these are magic bullet kind of situations where, someone's going to lead a process and the entire community is going to, have this moment where they all change their mind and become this thinking the exact same way about something. I don't think that's what happens, but I think we can have community conversations that are really allow people to think about what does it mean to be in this community? How do we want to engage, and how do we share those values and demonstrate those values in our physical spaces? And this isn't even to talk about kind of the underlying structural conditions around housing and poverty. I mean, I think we're working right now in a lot of places at the level of symbols, because those are the things that are a very important starting point, and trying to use those as launching conversations to also talk about the deep structural issues that are carried with that. So We did, as part of this process I mentioned earlier, a deep dive in the 1902 Virginia Constitution and what it did in Virginia to take away the voting rights of Blacks and poor whites who were seen to be kind of diluting the polity, right, by the former Confederates predominantly. And that Constitution didn't get changed until the 1970s. You know, there's still what do they call it, covenants that are no longer enforceable, but that are on pools and homes. And in this area, those covenants still exist on the deeds that say you can't sell them to Black people, you know, and you can't invite someone who's African American, can't come to this pool, be a member of this pool. So those are symbols at this point, right? They're not enforceable. The Supreme Court has ruled that you can't enforce those, but they're still really important pieces of the fabric and the structure that we have to work on, while we're also working on kind of the deeper socio-economic and political structures that have come out of this time period.
Yeah. So I would assume, in order to make the progress, three things just come to my mind, is basically having understanding, empathy, and flexibility.
Yeah.
So that we can, you know, try to navigate this effectively and get through the different situations, address those things that need to be addressed, and make the changes, as you stated, that we need to make. Yeah. Did you have anything? Okay, go ahead.
I would just maybe point to on those 3 points that the structure of local government and how local governments tend to make decisions and the structures by which they do that. And just in terms of the conversational structures, right? Robert's Rules of Order and having these kind of town hearings, those are not structures that are conducive to either understanding, empathy, or flexibility. And so, you know, thinking about what are the other ways that we need to hold conversations so that those legal processes need to happen. The vote needs to be cast, the decision needs to be made, but the civic structures that we have in place, for the most part, aren't capable of doing the 3 things that you just outlined, David. They're just not structured for that. And so I think for us as folks that are interested in doing kind of community conflict resolution or being mediators or facilitators in our communities, we have to look for alternative structures that we can wrap around those. So it doesn't take the place of, I'm not saying the city council meeting or the board of supervisors meeting doesn't matter. I'm saying I have to do something else to help so that by the time it gets to that political level, the community conversation has already been had, and there'll still be political contesting. That's the nature of politics, and people will still jockey for position. That's the nature of politics. But what will have created consensus or a sense of consensus within the community that really guides our political figures, our elected officials, as well as takes them off the hook a little bit for having to make the hard call, because we've made the hard calls in conversation with the community about what those values mean. So I think that's a really important piece, because I think you've hit it right on the head, that being able to understand, empathize, and be flexible in your thinking and is really important. And we have to find structures that allow people to do that.
Okay. So do you have any specific ways we can create those spaces where we can listen to understand each other?
Yeah, I think, I think there's a lot of different models for doing this, and depending, you can go pull a million books off the shelf that talk about different dialogue models. I do think that intentional process design is really important. So knowing a lot of dialogue models and things like that are about just building relationship. And if you're trying to actually make decisions, that's not what you're looking for, right? You need to create and design a process that include some stages over time that allow you to move from broader conversation to actual decision making. I've found that starting processes where we don't, at the beginning of the time together as a group, we're not focused on the issue at hand. We're focused on our values as a community is really important. And then we get to the issues at hand later, once we've been able to build some trust and some relationship. I've worked with big groups, groups of 50 to 100. I've worked with smaller groups, 15 to 30. The size and the makeup of the group, depends a little bit on the community and potentially sometimes the elected body who's asking for help with this. I do think that processes that are associated with the formal decision makers are important, because you get community buy-in for those, because they know that there's eventually a decision happening. So, I think one of the problems we have in our field is that we hold dialogue processes a lot, and the people that come are the people that are already willing to be open-minded. But when you put a decision on the line, we're able to get people into the room that wouldn't maybe otherwise come, and they're willing to risk some discomfort because they see a community decision down the road. So I think collaborating with those local government officials to figure out timelines that make sense. How do we structure decision processes, but then pulling it out of the elected official system so that we're actually able to do the conversation. Because I can ask a question right in a room and get an answer from people that would be quite different if someone who was in a position of decision-making authority asked that question. And that's important to allow people to engage. So I mean, I think there's so many different designs, and every process I've done has looked different, but I think the important pieces are that we focus on being able to build trust and some connection point among people who are working through it, and that we're very clear on what that group is doing and the steps in which they're doing it. So I usually lay out a project plan that looks like, even if this is for 9 months, what are we hoping we're going to be achieving at each one of our meetings? What's the stage in which we're at? What's the time in which we're going to make a decision, so that people know that they may have 3 months to just talk before they're going to be asked to come forward and say, here's my decision, right? Because it takes the pressure off. It gives them a chance to listen and hear and not feel like they have to be upfront. So I do think some really intentional design, a process makes sense. I've also had a lot of luck bringing in experts to launch conversations. So whether it is an expert on the like the history of a set of monuments, memorials, or like the town historian who can come in and talk about what's the actual history, not just the history that we all kind of think we know, but what's some of the actual background. Like I said, I mentioned we brought in someone who talked about the history of the 1902 Virginia Constitution, which is someone who went to high school in Virginia. I was quite astonished to realize I knew nothing about how intentional, right, this effort was, and how systematic, right, and deeply embedded the effort was to disenfranchise Black folks, during the Jim Crow era. So that was very useful, I think, for a lot of folks who hadn't always appreciated how systematic and some those, the rules were, and what the barriers are. So I think bringing in folks who can speak to the history, who are not necessarily members of the community and who don't necessarily have a dog in the fight, but are able to come in and say, here's based on my research, here's what we found, here's, I've had someone come in and talk about the history of the lost cause legacy, like really how did that form in the 1860s and 1870s and 1880s, and how did it deploy, and what did that look like? And then we can launch that into a conversation that says, well, what does that mean for us in this time, in this year, in this place? What does knowing that history mean for how we want to interact with each other? So I think the community conversations are really important, but also finding ways to bring in fact-based information, historical-based information that is not being brought in as part of the contest. It's being brought in as the backstory that people are reacting to, is really important, because as many of us know right now, history is part of how we're talking about our history, is part of how we're contesting these big social, racial equity issues. And so being careful about who we bring in and what they're coming in to talk about, and then setting up good process for people to have conversation and unpack it, so they're not just walking home with whatever this feeling is in their gut about whatever they just heard, that they have a chance to really work through it.
Okay, awesome. Did you want to jump in? We got just a few minutes left there. Did you want to jump in?
No, I'm just going to second your awesome. I think it's a very nuanced balance of looking at something and having, as you said, Damon, some people seeing it very positive. What is your problem? I think Julie said wallpaper, and other people seeing it and being horrified by it and not appreciating getting why someone wouldn't be horrified. So it's quite the acupuncture point, if you will, to really hit home on. So great conversation. Thanks, Damon. Thanks, Julie.
Yes. Well, Julie, we appreciate you. Is there any, I guess, last minute comments you want to make to the audience before you leave?
I guess I would just say that I think a lot of these conversations and issues feel overwhelming, and people are scared to engage because you don't want to end up seeming like you're on the wrong side, or having neighbors or community members who you're worried about your relationship with. And I hear that, and I appreciate that. They're important and they're hard, and they disrupt communities because we don't know how to have the conversation. But also an encouragement. I've seen a lot of hope in having communities really engage And they need to be structured, right? This isn't just to throw everybody in the room and hope some kind of magic's going to happen, right? I mean, we have to do some intentionality behind it, but a real encouragement for people to take on issues in their community in constructive ways, and asking for the right help and guidance and mentorship for how they want to engage in that, and using people who are in your local community who are already smart about doing facilitated processes and mediated processes. But I think that we have to start working on these issues kind of in our local spaces, even when we're a little afraid of it, because they're not going away.
Exactly. Well, we truly thank you, Julie, for being on our podcast, #Here to Here, keeping it 100, because you have kept it 100 today. And I know the audience is going to love what you have offered today. It has been truly a delightful conversation, an enlightening conversation, and I have certainly gained lots of knowledge myself. DJ, is there anything you wanted to say in closing?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Well, I
guys.
appreciate my co-host DG, and thanks again, Julie. We appreciate
Sure.
you. We will keep in touch. So take care, and we're signing off.